Yeah. Yeah.
Lock the door.
Yeah.
Stop wondering if there's no class today.
She sent us out.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Hey. Yeah, someone else is there.
All right, we'll wait one more minute before we start. All right. Let's get started. Does anybody else hear an echo? Oh, maybe it's gone. Okay. All right, this is our last class in our ongoing series on the 4th chapter of Bava Metzia. We are going to finish the chapter, please God, this evening, and probably a little bit faster than usual. And then we are going to take a break because of Sukkot, and then because I'm going to be away. And I thought we were coming back on the 11th of November, but they just called a shul board meeting for the 11th of November, so possibly I should go to that. So it may end up being the 18th of November that we come back. We'll see. I have to make that decision. I'll make an announcement. In any case, all right. So we have our last Mishnah in the 4th chapter. Which I guess I forgot to put the word Mishnah at the top in English, but I apologize for that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Lo yichaleka chenvani klayot ve'egozim latinokot mivnei shehu margilan lavo etzlo." So Rabbi Yehuda says that a storekeeper should not distribute klayot, are roasted grain, and egozim are nuts, to children, because it makes them want to come to him. It doesn't sound necessarily like the children here are the children of customers. It sounds like they're just children who happen to be walking past in the marketplace. And if you give them food, then they'll come back to you for food. And then when they grow up, they'll say, oh yeah, that guy, he's a nice guy. I remember going to him and he used to give me nuts. So I guess now I should go buy my sweaters from him or whatever it is he sells. It doesn't sound like the food he's distributing is connected necessarily to the product that he's selling. And Rabbi Yehuda says this is not an appropriate business practice. It sounds like just because Rabbi Yehuda wants people to decide where to buy their sweaters based on where they get the sweater that they want. And it sounds like he's saying using basically anything else to get customers to come to you is an inappropriate business practice. The Chachamim, however, don't have a problem with it. Chachamim matirin. And I think this is still Rabbi Yehuda talking. And you can't charge less than the market price, right? Whatever the price is that everybody's charging, you have to charge that. You can't charge less. Again, it really sounds like you can't even use lower prices to get customers. Yes, John.
So is he saying that all these is engaging in inappropriate practices?
It sounds like it. I think Rabbi Yehuda effectively thinks that everybody who is selling stuff has a right to make a living doing so. And if you undercut somebody else's ability to make a living doing this, then that's not appropriate. You're there to sell sweaters. You're not allowed to do anything else, which we don't rule like him. And it sounds like he's a tiny minority, but he does make it into the Mishnah as the first position, which is, capitalism is apparently not the only priority here. And for some people, it doesn't seem to be a priority at all, even if it would lower prices. Right? It seems like Rabbi Yehuda would be perfectly happy with a completely planned market in which, somebody who's in charge somewhere tells everybody what the price of the thing is, and you show up and you sell your stuff, and everybody gets exactly the same number of customers, and everybody goes home at the end of the day with just barely enough to survive on, and nobody can afford the products. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda would be perfectly happy with that situation. And it sounds like the Chachamim are not comfortable with that. They would prefer a freer market. But I don't want to draw grand conclusions from this, but it certainly, it sounds like we have a little bit of a push-pull here about whether, in fact, the goal is for people to compete, or the goal is just for everybody to do the same thing and make a living at some sort of bare minimum level. In any case, the Chachamim say about the person who undercuts the market price, the Chachamim say that person is Zachor Latov. No, actually, we like the person who, it's not just that you're allowed to lower your prices, we encourage it, we appreciate it, we thank you for it. Presumably because we think that people having access to lower priced merchandise is good for the customers, even if it's not good for your competitor. Lo yivor et hagrisin, divrei Abba Shaul. So Abba Shaul has another concern here. He says you're not allowed to sort beans. So what it seems like what we have here is beans that are sort of mixed up with the, either they're still inside the pods, or they're no longer inside the pods, but they're kind of mixed up with the pieces of the pods. And in order to eat them, you'd have to sort through it. And the idea seems to be that Abba Shaul wants everybody to sell this, mixture, and the customer will take it home and sort it. And that way the customer doesn't have to pay for the labor of sorting. And everybody has, I guess, somewhat cheaper food, but less convenience. And the commentaries seem to think that the problem is that whatever a fair price would be for sorting out the bits of trash from the beans, Abba Shaul thinks that the merchants are charging more than that for the service. Right? People are comfortable enough or happy enough to get the convenience of having food that's ready to just go in the water that's boiling on their stove, that they will pay more than Abba Shaul thinks it's worth as the difference between the ready-to-eat beans and the beans that still need to be sorted. And Abba Shaul thinks that's extortion to charge that much more. And so he's just sort of trying to quash the whole thing by saying nobody's allowed to sell sorted beans. And the Chachamim matirim, but the sages are okay with that one too. If it's worth money to me to be able to just start dinner when I get home and I don't have to sort my beans, then the Chachamim are okay with the market deciding how much that's worth. Umoldim shelo yivor me'al pi migorash eino el kagonev ta'ayin. But everybody agrees, including the sages, that what's not okay is to sort only the beans on top of the container. So that you look at it and you say, oh, those look really, really sorted and clean. Like I won't have very much work to do to sort them. I'd like 2 pounds of those. And then the guy takes his scoop and he scoops out beans, that are not necessarily only at the top, and you end up with a different product than what you thought you saw. Right? That's just fraud. And so the Chachamim agree that that's not okay. So the Gemara is going to spend some time on this, but you're not allowed to do things to improve the appearance of what's for sale, whether it's people, presumably that's slaves, or animals or stuff. You can't you can't improve their appearance, and we're gonna get into that more in the Gemara. Okay, Gemara. So the Gemara wants to know, the first thing that the rabbi said was that it's okay with them if the storekeeper hands out food to the children. So my Tamayu D'Rabbanan, why is that okay with the sages? What's their reason for permitting the distribution of food to little kids? De Amarle, because the guy who is distributing nuts and roasted grain could hypothetically say to his competitor, Ana mafligna am goze, I'm distributing nuts. Why don't you distribute plums? Or probably these are prunes, right? Like, okay, so like I'm the person who distributes this food and kids like me for that, but you can, choose a different snack food, and you can become the nice guy who gives out whatever you want to give out. It's not limited. It's not like if I do it, no one else can do it. If that looks to you like it's a good way to get customers, you do it too. It's okay. So now we're at the next bit where the Chachamim said that it's okay to undercut the price. In fact, it's a good thing to undercut the price. My Tama D'Rabbanan, what's the reason that the sages said that? Mishum de kamarvach latar, because it in fact lowers the market price for everybody, right? If the normal price is $5 for $1 and I sell them at $6 for $1, then people will come and buy them from me, and then the guy in the stall next door is going to lower his price too, so he doesn't lose all his customers. And pretty soon everybody in the marketplace will be selling them at $6 for $1. That's the theory. Now, the truth is that if everybody had to buy them at a high enough price that's, I'm taking a loss and everybody else can't afford to take a loss, I think the Chachamim are assuming that there's, a limit to how much loss I can afford to take, and I'm not going to do that for very long. And that I'd only be doing this if you can still make a profit at the price I'm selling them at. But they don't address that issue. And they don't address the idea of a loss leader either, right? A loss leader is when you sell one product at a very low price in order to get the customers in the door, and then you sell all your other products at normal prices or even at higher than normal prices. And because everybody came because your milk is super cheap, now they're going to buy the rest of their groceries at slightly higher prices, and in the end you'll make more profit off of these customers. The Chachamim don't address that. That might be because they're primarily dealing with merchants who sell only 1 or 2 products, or it might be because that particular practice hasn't been invented yet, or it might be that the Chachamim would say, well, okay, buy your milk from the place that has cheap milk, and buy your orange juice from the place that has cheap orange juice, and buy your bread from the place with cheap bread, and let people lower prices, and if the customers are savvy, then it'll lower all the prices. I don't know if it works that way, but the Chachamim might have thought that. Like, there's, I can't read their minds. I don't know exactly how far they would take this. Lower prices are always a good thing. Okay. So this is, now we had the dispute between Abba Shaul and the Chachamim about whether you can sort the beans. So now we're not interested in knowing what the reason of the rabbis is. We're more interested in knowing who the sages is. Usually when we ask this question, a lot of times when we ask this question is because we have someone in mind, and we're asking the question in order to introduce an assertion that the person with that position in the Mishnah is someone specific. This is actually someone we met last week. So it says Man Chachamim, who's the sages? It's Rabbi Acha. So we met Rabbi Acha last week. He was the one who said that if you mix different varieties of grape juice or wine together to sell in the store, which that was something that there was a consensus in the Mishnah other than him that you should not be able to do. And he said, as long as you're allowed to taste the product before you buy it, that's fine, right? If you don't allow people to taste it, then maybe they don't really know what they're getting because it's a blend of who knows what, and they won't like it. But if they're allowed to taste it and they taste it and they like it, so let them buy it. What's the problem? Okay, and here he has a very similar position. So the Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Rabbi Acha matir b'davar hanireh. Rabbi Acha permits you to change things in a way that's visible as long as people can see the product before they buy it. So in this case, you can see that this bin of beans is sorted and it doesn't have stuff in it. And that bin of beans over there is still mixed in with its trash. And you can decide which one you'd like to buy and which price you'd like to pay. And as long as nobody's deceiving anybody and everyone can see what they're getting, Rabbi Acha is perfectly happy with that. So we think that Rabbi Acha's position is the position of the Chachamim from our mission. Okay, now moving on to the last thing in the mission. This is what's going to occupy the rest of the Gemara. Ein mefarkasin lo et ha'adam v'chulei v'lo et ha'kelim. All right, so we don't decorate, we don't improve the appearance of things that are for sale or people that are for sale. Tana Rabbanan. Ein misharbetin et ha'behema. So this Braita says we don't something. Jastrow says it's stiffen probably the fur on an animal. The in nofchin bekarabayim, and you can't blow up innards. The in sharin tabasar b'mayim, and you can't soak meat in water. Right, these are presumably practices that make something look fresher or younger or healthier than it is, or bigger. Right, if you blow up the intestines, then that presumably makes the innards of the animal look like they take up more space, and so people will think that they're getting more meat than they are. And if you soak meat in water, it makes it look less dried out, less old. And if you maybe if you make the fur stand up on an animal, you can make the animal look bigger. Seems to be the idea. So my ein misharbetin. So what does this mean that you can't stiffen it? What is it that you're not allowed to do? So here in Babylonia, they explain that this is maya de chizra. It means that you're feeding the animal bran water. Apparently, drinking water that had bran soaking in it was supposed to make the animal's fur stand on end. I don't know exactly what that's about. I don't know whether it works or it's a Baba Misa, but I mean, there's certainly, it is possible to eat and drink things that change the texture of hair, but I don't know exactly what this one is and whether it works. And Zeiri Amar of Kahana, Zeiri said that Rav Kahana said that this is something more direct, is mizakfata. He said it's brushing the animal, right? You take your brush and you brush the hair sort of backwards to make it stand up. And then I guess like an animal trying to make itself look bigger to a predator who bristles the fur on its back, the animal will look bigger and it will it'll feel like a better, bigger purchase to the person who's paying for it. Okay, so that's what you're not allowed to do. And those were all, it would seem, deceptive practices, right? You're trying to make something that's not so desirable as a product look more desirable than it is in a way that doesn't actually improve it, right? If it actually improved it, that might have been different, but they're all things that don't actually make the product better. They just make it look better. Okay, so now we have a list of things that rabbis actually permitted, and we're going to be confused about whether they should have been forbidden or not. Shmuel shara limirme tume l'sarbala. So Shmuel allowed merchants to put fringes on a cloak. And that sounds like it might have a certain kinship with the cases that we've been forbidding, in the sense that fringes on a cloak don't actually make it a better cloak, but they do make it look nicer. Maybe people will pay more for a cloak with fringes on it. So maybe it's a deceptive practice to put decorations on clothing, because it doesn't actually make it more functional, but it does raise the price. But apparently Shmuel allowed fringes on a cloak, and Rav Yehuda shara lekaskose kirme. Rav Yehuda allowed you to make clothing shiny by rubbing something on it. It's not clear exactly what they rubbed on it. Maybe some sort of, I don't know, moisturizer or grease. I don't know, and I don't know exactly what kind of clothing it is. But again, it sounds like it didn't add to the functionality of the garment. It just made it look nice. Rabba shara lemedak tzrede. Rabba allowed them to beat the clothing made from hemp. I guess it makes it fluffy if you beat on it. Rabba shara, I'm sorry, that's the last one. Rava shara litzlume gire. Rava allowed people to draw arrows on things. This it sounds like it's also on clothing, but again, it doesn't do anything to make the object more functional or more useful or more valuable. It just looks nice. Rav Papa Bar Shmuel shara letzlume dikule. And Rav Papa Bar Shmuel allowed them to draw baskets on things. Again, it's not a real basket, it's a pretend basket. It doesn't actually do anything. It just looks nice. But we taught in our Mishnah in Mefarkasin lo ata adam v'lo ata behema v'lo ata kelim that you can't decorate things in order to sell them. So what's with all of these decorations that these rabbis are allowing on different kinds of clothes? Lo kasha ha bechadati ha b'atike. So we might have thought that the distinction would be something about the durability of the decoration, or the decoration actually it being obvious that you've decorated it, and so it's not deceptive. That is actually not the distinctions they choose to draw. They choose to draw the distinction between a new product and an old product. If you're selling an old product, which apparently the meats that they're talking about are the reason why you're trying to make them look better is because they're a little too old to sell. Then making it doing anything to improve its appearance is kind of, they think, definitionally deceptive. Whereas with a new product, decorating it is just it's not deceptive, because the thing is already the best that such a thing ever is, and people understand that, like, these are sweaters with arrows drawn on them, and those are sweaters without arrows drawn on them. But as long as both sweaters are new, people can make a responsible decision about what they should cost. Seems to be the idea here. Okay, now we want to know, how would you decorate a person? Pirkus de Adam Mahi. And this is going to introduce a story which I find kind of more than slightly disturbing. But I don't know entirely what to do with it. It's like the story of that elderly slave. The Azal Tsabe L'Reshev L'Dikne. He went and he dyed his head and his beard. And it sounds like this is a slave who is selling himself. I'm not entirely sure whether that means that when they say he's an old slave, actually he's an old man who's not yet a slave, who's trying to turn himself into a slave, and he's trying to raise money to settle debts or something, or whether he's already a slave, but somehow he's responsible for the sale of himself. It doesn't sound like it comports with any kind of slave market that I've ever heard about in our world, but I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. In any case, he dyes his hair and his beard. Atala Kame to Rava, and he goes to Rava. It seems that this guy has an ambition to sell himself to a rabbi specifically, which could be because he, is Jewish and he'd like to make sure that he's allowed to continue practicing Judaism, or it could be for some other reason. I find this story somewhat baffling. In any case, he comes to Rava and he says to Rava, Amar le Zibnin. He says, buy me. Amar le, so Rava says back to him, you anim b'nei veitecha. So he quotes this saying of the rabbis, I believe it is in Pirkei Avot, but I did not look it up, that the poor should be members of your household. And it seems that Rashi and other commentaries think that this means you're supposed to have the poor as members of your household. I invite lots of poor people to hang out in my house all the time, so I'm always surrounded by people who can help me. And if I really needed help getting something done, I would just ask my house guests to do it for me. I don't need to buy a slave. I've got, plenty of people at home to get the work done, which gives you it's an interesting way to think of these house guests, that apparently they can be counted on to help with the work, but that's of some kinds of work and of some kinds of house guests, that is true. I wish I had more information so I could know exactly what this dynamic is. So the slave goes on. Atala Kamei Rav Papa. He comes in front of Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, and he says, and Rav Papa Bar Shmuel Zavne, he buys him. Yom Echad Amar Le. So one day, it's not clear how much time elapses here, but one day, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel says to the slave, Ashkan Maya, bring me a drink of water. Azal Tavre L'Reishe V'Ladina. He goes and he whitens his head and his beard. Probably this just means he washed the dye out. Maybe it means he dyed it back to its original color. Seems like a lot of work to go to either way. And he comes back and Amar Le Chaze Da'ana Kashish Me'avu. He says, see, I'm older than your father. That seems to mean I'm too old to work, or it's disrespectful for you to ask me to get water for you. So, I'm just gonna sit down over here and be a retired slave. I'd like to go directly from you purchasing me to being a retired slave on your dime. And instead of trying to, I don't know, get his money back, because it seems to me like this is definitely a deceptive sales practice, that it certainly should be possible to just reverse the transaction since he did not get what he was paying for. Rav Papa Bar Shmuel seems to be just sort of accepting that he's stuck, because he says, Kare anafshe Tzadik mitzara nechlatz ve'avo acher tachtav. Let's take a look at the pasuk that he's quoting. We're in Mishle 11:8 here. And it doesn't quite say what Rav Papa Bar Shmuel says. As I noted in the footnote. It says Mishle 11:8. Here we are. It says, Tzadik misara nechlatz. Tzadik escapes from difficulty. Vayavo rasha tachtav. And the evildoer, or possibly if Tzadik is righteous, then rasha is evil. If Tzadik is just innocent, then rasha is just guilty. Right? They can have either pair of meanings depending on the context. I think in Mishle it's usually righteous and evil. So the righteous man escapes from difficulty, and the bad person, the evil person, gets stuck there in his place, comes in instead of him. So it sounds like, on the one hand, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel is applying this to himself and Rava, right? Rava was the righteous guy. He had the good sense to say no. Apparently, in general, he said no to slave ownership. And as a result of saying no to slave ownership, he did not get himself stuck with a deceptively marketed slave who can't actually serve him, or won't actually, or shouldn't actually serve him. Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, on the other hand, I agreed to participate in slave ownership. And as a result, I got stuck in the situation. So I want to say a couple of things. One of them is that Rav Papa Bar Shmuel does seem to think he's stuck. And it's not clear to me why. It's not clear to me why he doesn't think he can claw back his money and undo this transaction, because this is exactly the kind of deceptive transaction that we spent most of this chapter saying that in fact, it should be a mekach ta'ut, and he should be able to get his money back. So I'm not sure why he thinks that he's just stuck with the situation, but he does seem to think that there is something righteous about refusing to own slaves and something evil about owning slaves. And so I find in this story, while at the same time it continues to embrace slave ownership, same as the rest of the Talmud, as a reality, I find a little breath of hope here in the idea that there is implanted here the thought that the better people refuse to have slaves because they're going to use their resources to help the poor instead. And then I guess if they need work done, the poor will help them with it. And the people who use their resources to enslave people, those are the bad guys, and they deserve to have something bad happen to them. I take some hope from that, because in general, I find discussions of slavery kind of hope draining in the Gemara, because it's considered so normal. In any case, that is the end of our chapter. Are there questions? Okay. We're going to stop here. I will let you guys know, probably through the show announcements, probably also through an email, when we're going to start again, and hopefully what chapter we're starting with. I have a thought, but I want to actually go make sure it's what the chapter is, what I remember it being, before I make a decision. But hopefully I will choose something shorter that we can actually finish this school year. Harvey, did you want to say something?
Not particularly.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted the option.
I noticed you unmuted yourself, so I was just checking. Anyway, okay, so I will let you guys know, and thank you for sticking with me for more than a year through some very difficult material. And Mazel Tov, and I'll see you in a few weeks, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.